So there's a common misconception these days that comfort is happiness. And I'm here to tell you that I think some of the happiest moments of my life have been when the temperature hits freezing, the wind becomes katabatic, and I can barely see through the windshield or the tent flap. You know, if these are the moments that can truly make us feel alive, then I would say that Iceland could be considered one of the happiest places on the planet. For the last 13 years, my work as a photographer has focused on exploring some of the world's most remote locations to try and understand through photography just what the human potential is in the natural world. For a kid who grew up, without a passport, never traveled anywhere, exploring, and realizing just how big the world was a really, really good education for me. It was early in my career that Iceland first left its mark upon me. I was young, I was eager, and maybe there were even times where I was irrational in my goals to explore the remote and often harsh parts of this planet. It was after my first editorial assignment that brought me to Iceland to explore its surfing potential that I ended up coming back year after year after year. And all in all, it's been 33 trips over 10 years that have made me fall in love with this landscape, its people, and most of all, its appreciation and dedication to nature. For myself and many others, Iceland represented a type of thinking that I don't think I'd ever experienced before. It was a place that seemed to put nature highest on its priority list. Iceland's passion for its unique environment seemed to be ever present in its emotion-filled music, its poetry, and even its saga-written history. I've spent the majority of my adult life traveling and outdoors, and through those experiences, I've had a chance to witness a lot of beauty. But I can still vividly remember the first time I saw one of Iceland's glacial rivers. Peering out of the small window on a flight from Ireland to Iceland, we began to approach Iceland's interior through heavy clouds. I looked down, and I saw something I would never forget. The pilot said we were passing the Vatnajökull Glacier, largest in Europe. And I could make out these intricate patterns in the sand, leading from the glacier and making their way towards the sea. These patterns, they swirled with color, weaving the blues and greens of glacial sediment in and out amongst shallow sandbars in a really unorganized way. I'd never seen something so intricate in nature. In fact, it was hard to believe that it wasn't man-made. In my mind, the only thing I could really compare it to was a fine art painting. My face pressed so hard against the glass that I actually left an impression on the window. And I felt like I had just gotten a glimpse of some kind of rare occurrence. Maybe something so unique that it only happens, once in a lifetime. It took me a few years, but I finally started to understand what I was looking at. The truth was, this was far from a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but actually something that occurs regularly in Iceland. Every day, in fact, when these rivers flow unobstructed from glacier to sea. I felt compelled to gain a deeper understanding. And it didn't take me too long to find a pilot willing to take me back to these areas and explore. Now, over the course of the next, I would say, 7 years, I flew over almost every major tributary in Iceland. I followed most rivers from source to sea, from the glacier all the way to the ocean. Photographing these rivers brought me, as you can imagine, great joy, as each image slowly began to kind of reveal more and more of their mystery. In many ways, it was sort of a visceral experience as you open the plane window. You thrust your body willingly out into the cold for a few brief seconds in hopes that you can kind of create what you're seeing in your mind's eye. I realized that it was hard at times to appreciate the grand scale and divine design of these vast areas without being in the sky. And I think that's really what I loved most about it, is that it required all of your attention, all of your focus. At times, water would even well up in the corners of my eyes due to exposure from the wind, or maybe it was the beauty of the landscape, I can't really tell. Behind me is a photograph of the Thrugna River during a heavy glacial melt in October, photographed from a small Cessna aircraft at 4,000 feet. This is a real photograph. Now, at a certain point, much like anything that brings us great joy, it actually began to feel selfish to not share it with others. And so I started to share this personal body of work through magazines, art galleries, and of course, social media. It felt a bit like bearing a part of myself to the world because it was a deeper part of myself I found each time that I stepped out onto a black sand beach or flew over the massive glaciers. And the very moment I began to put this work out into the world, this is, like I said, 7 to 8 years ago, I realized just how important it was that I had made the choice to share it. Various environmental groups and NGOs informed me that most, if not all, of Iceland's major rivers were in danger. And that was the conversation happening at the time. I began to realize that there was, in fact, a very complicated side to much of Iceland's nature. Rivers were being dammed, and there was plans to harness the power of almost all of Iceland's rivers, cutting off this important flow from source to sea. A flow that not only brings life to animals and vegetation, but provides water for many farms, much of what we drink. But the issues didn't stop there. Iceland's entire highland region was actually at risk of exploitation. A wilderness place that I had always considered to be a sort of refuge from the world, maybe one of the last quiet places. Beyond the visible damage like dried up riverbeds, dead waterfalls, high voltage power lines, and of course roads running through pristine landscape, the greatest long-term environmental impacts had never actually truly been studied. Wildlife, including the Arctic fox, reindeer, salmon, and various whale species that much of this nation considers precious are those who actually suffer most of all. Unlike us, they can't simply relocate when forced out of their homes or when their food source no longer runs downstream. It's hard to expect wildlife to change millions and millions of years of migratory patterns at our convenience. With ongoing pressure from more dams, aluminum plants, and the geothermal energy that has to power them, I realized that maybe the Iceland I fell in love with wasn't the Iceland that would always be there. And I struggled with the knowledge that geothermal and hydro energy are actually some of the cleaner sources of energy on the planet. But after our basic needs are met, and when created at the expense of nature, or to be sent overseas to solve Europe's energy crisis, we must ask the question, is there another way? I was determined to search out the answer and knew my body of work could help support the vision of Iceland's dream of creating a national park. You can only travel to distant lands for so long before you feel a sense of responsibility to lend your voice in protection of these wild places. So I partnered my voice and focused my efforts on working with the Highland Project. It took time to understand how a country so forward-thinking could have such a complicated relationship with nature. In so many ways, Iceland, it sets the standard for the rest of the world in a way that its people seem to coexist with nature. And I know that in order to care about this nature we are in danger of losing, sometimes a deeper medium is more effective at demonstrating what precious treasures exist in the Highlands today. So I prepared a short visual odyssey for you to truly understand the landscape that is at stake. And if you can shut off the lights, I'd be greatly appreciated. Oops. just got really emotional watching that. Was not prepared for that to happen. I mean, how did that make you feel? I don't know about you, but that makes me feel so incredibly alive. You know, to feel the power of the land, to feel inspired. It made me want to be better. It makes me want to do better, I guess. Now, if I can just get this to work, that would be excellent. One second. Technical difficulties. The video is just too powerful. It just took over the whole system here, so not exactly. There we go. Looks like we have one screen. So everybody's gonna have to twist their neck, I guess, a little bit. Sorry about that, you guys. Not sure what's going on. Now I realize that every piece of marketing, photograph and film that goes out there into the world like this is really, it's calling people to come and see this place for themselves. With that call comes a huge responsibility to ensure its safety. It's interesting because what the tourism industry really should be is a partnership with every person that steps foot in your country, much like the Icelandic pledge, that asks tourists to be an advocate for nature. An agreement that what you hold sacred, you are willing to share with others and with the world. So it's more important now than ever that the demographic of people you're inspiring to come visit Iceland are the type of people that understand its fragile environment, its history, its resources, and its possibility for adventure. It doesn't take a genius to realize that over the years, Iceland has quickly become one of the fastest growing tourism markets in the world. In fact, with just a mere stroke of a thumb, you can access millions of images of people sharing Iceland's beauty every single day. When we look for an answer as to why, Iceland has become so popular for tourism, we often come up with the same few responses. We blame it on great marketing strategies and more affordable travel after the economic crash. Maybe it's exploding volcanoes, or the easiest place to point the finger, social media. I would venture to say that beyond all the various reasons why Iceland has grown in popularity, I think there is another more deeply rooted cause. It's because of how, regardless of how easy or how affordable we have tried to make the experience of getting here, or even how incredible it may look to others when we share it, to truly experience Iceland, you have to be willing to give something greater than your cost of travel. You first have to be willing to experience the ever-changing conditions, the abruptly diverse landscape, a landscape that will often ask you to thrust yourself outside your comfort zone and into a world of raw elements that force you to find courage, force you to build a stronger character. This is the experience that human beings are craving. It's the experience that keeps people coming back for more, simply because it's becoming harder and harder to find it elsewhere. If we fail to understand that raw, unfiltered nature is Iceland's greatest treasure, possibly even its greatest export, then we might fail to understand the reason why people are so truly drawn to this land. Such a valuable asset should be protected at all costs, for our inspiration and sanity, as much as for nature and wildlife. Throughout my career, I've had the chance to work alongside some of my favorite national parks through conservation efforts and commercial projects, and this has given me some incredible opportunities to see clearly how many of these parks are managed internally and externally. Now, please understand that not every park is managed perfectly, and they don't always get it right, but some of them come pretty darn close. Denali National Park in the great state of Alaska, which sees over 600,000 visitors a year, is an amazing example of a place where varied interests have paved the way for everyone from bush pilots to mountaineers to hunters and wildlife enthusiasts to be able to create bridges in how they manage such a large environment and protect it for the use, for not only their use, but for the use of future generations. Ultimately, protecting it from exploitation, including mining, deforestation, and overhunting. As you can imagine, this park, which features the biggest mountain in North America and some of the most diverse glacial and rock terrain in the world, was at one time a very much used and abused wilderness. Alaska wasn't even a state when Charles Sheldon began to lobby for the park's protection. At the time, it was a landscape that not only took courage to visit, but it took even more courage to fight for it. Even at a size larger than the state of Massachusetts, or the Iceland's West Fjords, for example. Denali National Park is in fact the bare minimum in size required to protect a completely intact ecosystem and its wildlife populations within. In 1976, Denali was designated as an international biosphere reserve. Biosphere reserves have been designed as tools for reconciling and integrating the conflicting interests and pressures characterized by the land use planning today. The origin of the Biosphere Reserve goes back to the Biosphere Conference, organized by UNESCO in 1968. The first intergovernmental conference to seek to reconcile this conservation and use of natural resources. This designation allows Denali to conduct research and operate as an intact ecosystem. The park attracts research biologists and botanists from all over the world to study intact ecosystems where rivers still rage, wolves still roam, and grizzly bears still put humans in their place at the bottom of the food chain. All in all, Denali is more than just a well-managed park. It's actually a marvel in modern-day land management. Today, Denali's total size is over 6 million acres of protected area. Now, within the national park system, Denali has stood as an amazing example of how to foster good relations from varied interests from many different walks of life. It's examples like these and many others that restore my faith in the idea that a national park in Iceland could not only work, but set a standard for the rest of the world. It has the potential to not only be studied from those that step foot in its rugged landscape, but used as an example of how when a country is united, it can hold precious what's most dear to it. All in all, it's Iceland's people that will protect the highlands. It won't be the voice of an outsider like myself, but the many varied interest groups joining together to protect this land. It's going to take the fisherman, the farmer, hunter, off-road enthusiast, government official, and many more, including the hopeful tourists, to add their voice to the many others for the fight of preservation of this country. Now, currently, most of the tourism Iceland consists of the 6-hour stretch of coastline easily accessible from Reykjavik, called the Ring Road, which encompasses part of the Golden Circle. Why is this part of the country so frequented? Because of the pattern and example that visitors have set before them. And then that pattern example has been highlighted and supported by every photograph and tourism company that has followed and marketed after it. The only way to change that pattern and begin maintaining sustainable tourism in Iceland is to spread the interest and educate people as to what exists inside this incredible country, not just on its rim. My hope is that the Hallandin National Park, along with a robust marketing campaign, will move tourism in Iceland in a more sustainable direction. If we are to look at and provide healthy and educated tourism, we need to pay attention into what has gone on in the South. The go-to hotspots have changed and evolved over the years from their humble beginnings of farmlands being independently managed to large-scale operations after reaching thousands of people per day. The human impact has been monumental, and the reality is if it doesn't lighten, the effects could be disastrous. This is why a national park can be powerful in creating strategic, sustainable tourism that not only allows people to experience it, but also brings the much-needed support for other smaller regions and towns in Iceland. The power a national park provides are various protections to ensure land and resources maintain their wildness and beauty, and the funds to continue maintaining it. From the Hallandin website, I read, the Central Highlands have been described as one of Iceland's greatest treasures, containing volcanoes, glaciers, voluminous rivers, waterfalls, colorful hot springs, mud pools, vast lava fields, and broad expanses of black sand, all contrasted with oases of vibrant but vulnerable vegetation. Collectively, these natural phenomena and magnificent landscapes form one of the largest untamed wildernesses in the whole of Europe. This is a land that I hope everybody will one day get to experience. As a father of 2 young boys, Jeremiah and Forrest, I have always told them that for me, Iceland is one of the last quiet places on the earth. It has the potential to make you a better person for experiencing it, for simply even witnessing it. Iceland itself is a legacy. It's been protected and stewarded by the shepherds that have lived here for countless generations before us foreigners ever dared to take a vacation here. And I hope you can see now why it's becoming mine and many other people's life's work to do it justice, to help to preserve it. I discovered that the way we are most likely able to ensure these types of legacies is to open the eyes of the younger generations that are coming behind us, The children that are going to be in charge of protecting these places long after we are gone. A couple years ago, I embarked on a project that would speak directly to these younger generations. It was an award-winning children's book that forced me to ask the simple question, how do I find happiness? And where do you go to look for it? In a world of diminishing attention spans where children are connected with less and less with nature, I felt it was imperative to teach the younger generation that some of the answers to life's toughest questions can actually be answered in nature. Now, the earth tells the boy that the road to happiness is long, but if he is willing, the earth will show him the way. In a conference such as this, it definitely feels odd to share a children's book. I mean, we're all mostly adults here. I think I saw one baby. But then again, maybe this is the most important thing I can share. For me, this was above and beyond the most successful project I ever worked on. It forced me to approach storytelling in a more simple way. And what it really boils down to is that nothing will ever speak to us like nature will. The importance it plays in our lives may never fully be understood. And if there is one thing I know to be true, if there's one maybe kernel of truth I could leave with you, it's that in a world that is getting louder and louder, it's never been more important to seek out and protect the last quiet places. Thank you so much.